What are the outlines of what the president really wants to accomplish in tax reform?
Right. First and foremost, in fact, the president called me on my way over to this interview to remind me that first and foremost in his mind is that 15% corporate rate. We need that in order to drive the economic investment, the capital investment. We need that in order to get companies to move back to the United States from overseas, to get overseas companies to move here for the first time. That's going to drive our productivity, going to drive GDP growth, going to get us to that sustained 3% economic growth that we so desperately need and want in this country. We've suffered under lower than average growth now for more than 10 years. It's simply unacceptable to this president. It should be unacceptable to folks back home. So that 15% is driving a lot of this. Beyond that, we want it to be simpler and fairer for people. Folks in the middle class should get a reduction, and they will under the president's proposal, but it will also be easier for them to pay their taxes. I've seen numbers, David, as high as 90+% of people actually hire somebody else to do their taxes because it's too complicated. It should be simpler for ordinary Americans to pay their taxes. They want to pay it, but they want it to be easy to pay those taxes, and that's what we're going to focus on. So we're focusing on a corporate component, an individual component. The bottom line, though, is what we're trying to do is get these reductions, get these reforms in order to jumpstart the American economy and get back to that sustained level of 3% economic growth.
So if this is important to the president, important to you, I want to make sure we're absolutely clear. There's going to have to be compromises somewhere, but as of right now, the president is not interested in 16% or 17% or 20%. It's 15%.
Well, he pointed out to me correctly, by the way, this morning when I was talking to him, that in China, one of our biggest, if not our biggest international competitor, on certain corporate entities there, the tax rate is already 15%. How could we expect to be as competitive when we have corporate tax rates above those of our competitors? I think the average is something like 22% amongst the developed nations. We're at 35 and higher. So we need to get these rates down. The president desperately wants that 15%, and I think the way we look at it is folks who want to help us get to 15% are the president's friends when it comes to fixing taxes.
How much more difficult does that make your job? I mean, we're all concerned about deficits, but no one more than you. When you were in the Congress, you were widely known to be very concerned about deficits. What are you going to have to do to find the money to get down to 15% on the corporate rate?
Yeah, I've said this before. I'll say it again. You cannot balance the budget long term in the United States of America at 1.8% economic growth. There's simply not the attitude, not the willingness on Capitol Hill to reduce spending in order to meet that level of growth, which generates that level of revenue for the United States government. You have to get back to that 3% growth. If we had 3% growth, David, over the last 10 years instead of the anemic growth that we had under the previous administration, you'd be very close to balancing the budget this year. That's how powerful, sustained every single year, 3% on average economic growth can be when you're looking at a $19 trillion economy. So yes, we have to be responsible about spending. Yes, we have to show some fiscal discipline, but the real cure to our ills is long-term economic growth, which is what drives this entire debate.